Agnoloni, Agno, det har med får att göra. Fårö. Han ska läsa dikter för er på korta dikter, först på italienska och så översättning som han också han har översatt till. Han är publicerad både på italienska, engelska, danska och franska, polska. Ja. Och just nu är han uppe på författarcentrum och här har han tagit med sig några kollegor här. I also want to read some poems for us. No? Welcome. Okay. Så han har fått ett stipendium uppe på författarcentrum och han skulle gärna vilja lära sig lite svenska under den här veckan som är kvar. Så om någon vill ge honom en liten kurs i svenska, har vi ordnat det redan eller? Nej, så får ni gärna tala om det för honom att vi kan lära honom. Han vill lära sig lite grunderna i svenska. Han bor i Florens i Sankt Lars församling, Lorenzo, la parrocchia dello Santo Lorenzo, Florens. Sankt Lars, Sankt Lars.
Like Larry.
Yes.
In English, yeah.
Och han är en aktiv katolik.
Ja.
Har du kollat det?
Jo, han har ju varit.
Okay, yeah.
Välkommen.
Thank you for coming. I hope it comes out well. Okay. So, I will just say two introductory words before beginning. This is the first poem I'm going to read. Is not mine. This is by a dear friend of mine who is an excellent poet from Naples. His name is Diego Caiazzo, and I have translated this first stanza of his long poem La Via Lattea, the Milky Way, into English. And I think this is a perfect introduction for the other materials written by me that I'm going to read afterwards, because it is about an intimate pilgrimage intertwined with reflections on history, on the game of chess, on music, on Johann Sebastian Bach, and his own personal experiences, love experiences, life experiences. So I will first read this poem by Diego Caiazzo, and then I will move on to a mix of prose and poetry by me. The prose passages are from my novel Sentieri di Notte, in English Paths of the Night, which has come out also in Spanish and will shortly come out in Polish. And the poems instead are from a poetry collection I'm working on here at the Baltic Centre for Writers and Translators in Italian and English. So we'll start now with Diego Caiazzo's La Via Lattea, first stanza. C'è un viaggio che compio ogni giorno in composta solitudine, come fosse un pellegrinaggio a un santuario lontano. Ed è vero che cerco come una guarigione, o forse è solo il cammino di un devoto al santo del ricordo, è un percorso mistico, fatto di immagini perdute, fissate alle pareti del cielo, la Via Lattea delle dimenticanze. There is a journey that I make every day, in quiet solitude, as if it was a pilgrimage to a remote sanctuary. And it's true that I search for a sort of recovery, or maybe it's just the walk of a devotee, of the saint of memory, a mystical route made of lost images, attached to the walls of the sky, the Milky Way of forgetfulness. Now, I would first like, and I will then shift to the PC 1 second because I forgot to print it out, to a first passage from my novel, Sentieri di Notte, which is actually set in Berlin. I have to say two little things about this novel so that you can understand what I'm going to read. It is a novel in which I imagine that in the year 2025 there would be a huge collapse of internet all over Europe. Yes, it could happen. Technically, it could happen, but it's not just because I want to predict it. It's not a prophecy. It's just like a hypothesis to investigate on how we would all react to such, a sudden lack of internet, because we live with internet. We cannot live without it. It looks like we cannot live without it. So there's this coup attempted and enacted by a multinational corporation based in Berlin. And some characters try to set up a resistance against this. So there are social implications and there are psychological implications. And the first part is more towards the social part and the historical part, because it reflects on the history of Berlin with the wall and, the historical division between the East and the West. And the second passage I will read from my novel is more psychological, because it is the dreamlike journey of one of the main characters across a sort of mystical fog that has invaded and is besieging the city of Krakow in Poland. So let's start from Berlin, first of all. This is first in Italian, and then I will read it in English. Just let me find the, like all good Italians, I'm very untidy. So I need to, we have fantasy, we don't have organization. That's why we come to Sweden. Yeah. So, yes, this is the second one, and the first one is going to come out in a second. You can sip your coffee meanwhile. Okay, I found it. Okay, let's start with Italian. Immaginare di calarsi su Berlino dall'alto, in volo, scendendo da un'altezza incommensurabile, come una di quelle immagini satellitari che piombano su una città dai limiti dell'atmosfera e illuminano via via particolari di cantieri, strade, case. Sentire di poter scegliere tra migliaia di possibilità, come se fossero tutte a disposizione, e poi ritrovarsi nel cuore della metropoli confine, la più avanzata frontiera d'Europa, un tempo linea di demarcazione tra l'est e l'ovest, e oggi, o magari fino a ieri, tra il passato e il futuro. Raggiungere il cuore della modernità, in Berliner Freiheit, giusto dietro il Sony Center, in un angolo che avrebbe potuto essere un ritaglio di Wall Street, preso e incollato nel vecchio continente, laddove 40 anni fa si estendeva la landa desolata tra Potsdamer Platz e Leipziger Platz. I fantasmi si aggirano ancora, quelli di coloro che hanno cercato inutilmente di varcare il muro, ma anche le migliaia di pedoni armati di cellulare multifunzione, con gli auricolari infilati nelle orecchie e la testa persa in universi sintetici che vagano per le strade del centro e ogni minuto attraversano a frotte un incrocio. Nessuno crederebbe a ciò che è appena successo, forse nemmeno se ne sono accorti. Tutti, in fondo, hanno questo in comune: un'utopia in corso, come un sogno indotto. Gli spettri per illudersi di essere serviti a qualcosa, i passanti per non impazzire, io per trovare una ragione per non odiarmi. Dreaming of flying down onto Berlin from an immeasurable height, like one of those satellite pictures that descend onto a city from the limits of the atmosphere, zooming in on details of sites, streets and buildings. Feeling the possibility of choosing among thousands of options, as if they were all available, and then finding yourself in the heart of the metropolis, the most advanced frontier in Europe, once a boundary line between the East and the West, and now, or maybe until yesterday, between the past and the future. Reaching the core of modernity in Berliner Freiheit, right behind the Sony Center, in a corner that could be a piece of Wall Street, cut and pasted into the old continent, where 40 years ago, the wasteland between Potsdamer Platz and Leipziger Platz was. Ghosts are still wandering. Those of the people who uselessly tried to jump over the wall, but also thousands of pedestrians with their multifunction mobile phones on, their headsets stuck into their ears, and their minds lost in synthetic universes, rambling around the streets of the city and swarming across the intersections at every minute. No one would believe what has just happened. Maybe they haven't even realized it. In the end, they all have this in common: a utopia, or a sort of induced dream. The ghosts, to convince themselves that they have been useful for something; the pedestrians, to avoid going crazy; me, to just find a reason not to hate myself. And this, instead, is a passage from Krakow Journey, around Krakow journey, I would say of this other character, whose name is Desmond O'Rourke. He's an Irish theologian who lost his memory some years before, and he's supposed to walk through this mysterious fog that is besieging Krakow, gradually coming closer to the center, to the castle of Krakow, the Wawel, where only some people can still resist before being swallowed into this huge white cloud. So while walking across this fog, he recovers bits and pieces of his memory, of his past. And thanks to this, he also becomes aware of a secret concerning the relationship between him and his beloved, Leila, who recently died, and actually left him an invention before she died, which is a special type of spectacles called the infraviewer that would be useful for something in the future. And now he understands for what. To just walk across the white and realize what is going on inside it and not get lost. Would you like me to read it directly in English? Because it's quite long. Okay. Because it's useless to read it in Italian if it is too long. So now the character is in a sort of warehouse, and he doesn't understand what is going on. The warehouse was empty. The walls, that once must have been white, were covered by greyish patina. The floor instead had a dark, almost black color. The ceiling, full of holes, half revealed wide spaces veiled by decades-old spiderwebs. If I'd had a clear idea of the part of the city I was in, perhaps I would have understood what building that was, but I was almost certain I had never seen anything like that. I realized there were no audible sounds or noises. Everything was enveloped in pneumatic silence. I didn't feel shaken, but exposed. My skin had kind of flown away, my nerves were uncovered, and the memories of my third eye focused on something I couldn't identify. All of a sudden, I noticed that my guiding light was no longer pulsing. It had disappeared, dissolved in silence, maybe so that I looked for it when it was too late, when I couldn't help proceeding, and there was only one possible direction. At the very end, a door, metallic, light grey, an elevator. As soon as I visualized it, I began perceiving a remote buzz, similar to the sound of 1,000 insects. No, there were 10,000 needles repeatedly stinging my perceptive sphere with unintelligible messages. Underneath, a low-pitched throb pressed rhythmically with the insistence of disco drums. That basic vibration irresistibly sucked me in towards the elevator. Once I was in front of it. With my fingertips I touched the sliding doors, which opened immediately. I hesitated, holding my breath, accompanied only by the intermittent neon light of the ceiling. My heart was shattered, as it had already occurred to me once, although I couldn't quite focus on that moment. When the elevator began descending, I unmistakably knew that I was going there. I felt sheer terror. Something was burning intensely near my breastbone, while the cabin kept proceeding down with slight jolts. Besides, my sight was blurring, as if I was at an incredible depth under the sea, subject to a terrible pressure. The needles had weakened, and the drum's frequency had increased until it became a uniform rumble. The panic remained momentarily suspended, and the breach of hope opened in me, unexplainable but real. The neon light got suddenly steady, and the doors slid open. I realized I was in an old and somber hall, full of young students dressed like priests, who were listening to a high prelate with the air of a professor. I wasn't sure of that, but something in my mind and heart told me that I'd already had something to do with that man. Yes, we'd already met in the past, and the more I looked at his face, the more that thought became a certainty. His features were familiar to me, but it was as if I tried to forget them with all my strength. It wasn't a pleasant sensation. It was a nightmare becoming real. Only at that point did the infraviewer turn on again. The light pulsed intensely on the right towards another hall, filled with dancing people. It was a sort of disco, where there was a party. The music that made all those bodies twist was not audible. The drums, before so strong, had dissolved into the incomprehensible words of the priest, to then transform into the winding motion of that crowd. All was black and dense beyond the window separating me from that scenery. Then the light shifted to another point. illuminating a face that I'd forgotten, so much pain and time had changed it, so radiant and beautiful that it had shaken my life. Layla smiled at me as she had done the day I first met her. Then I remembered. And now, thank you. Now we are moving on to poetry. This was prose. Now we're going on with poetry. You will see that my poems are somehow in tune with the prose. It's not just the same thing, of course, but the title of my collection of poems is Shadows Fading In. I wanted to reflect on the concept of fading, because normally we think of things that are fading out, like disappearing, vanishing. But I think that the concept of fading in is more suggestive, because especially, you know, when it comes to memories, when it comes to pain, when it comes to the fear of dying, and all those visceral feelings that fill our lives, sometimes I would say in the most decisive moments, these are like shadows that enter our life. And at the same time, there is a nice concept, a very deep concept, that I've discovered while reading The Cloud of Unknowing, this essay by an anonymous 14th century mystic who described God as light and also shadow. So sometimes veiling our eyes in order to reveal himself or herself after a moment of disorientation. And it is precisely thanks to these moments of disorientation that we can become aware of the depth of ourselves, and in the depth of ourselves find a glimpse of God, for those who believe in God, of course. So these are not religious poems, of course. They are rather psychological, I would say, and the concept that runs through all the collection is contemplation. I would skip the Italian version if you agree. No? You want to read? You want to hear? Okay, Italian. Okay. I just don't want to bother you with long times. Okay. Auto in corsa su un lenzuolo giallo umido di campo. Ara lo sterrato come stilografica su carta, sgranando un rosario di corpuscoli di ghiaia. Il cielo la sorveglia come una vecchia coperta stesa sul mondo. Traccia una linea che comprime decenni recenti e remoti. Taglia il rettangolo del mio finestrino, staccando il prima dal dopo e rendendola adesso un punto che sfugge, catturato dal rullo dei chilometri bruciati. Running car on a yellow-white sheet of countryside. Flows a dirt road like a fountain pen on paper, sending out chips of gravel as if they were rosary beads. The sky watches over it like an old blanket spread out over the world. It draws a line compressing recent and remote decades, cuts the rectangle of my window, detaching the before from the after, and making the now an elusive dot, captured by the roll of burnt miles. Quando mi fermo sul margine della notte, percepisco il dito raggelante dell'ultima membrana, in un eterno rimando di morte. Nascondo la testa sotto sabbia anestetica e attendo che si apra un varco di comprensione. Poi arriva il sonno. When I stop on the edge of the night, I perceive the chilling finger of the last membrane in an eternal deferment of death. I hide my head in an ecstatic sand and wait for a gap of comprehension to open. Then sleep arrives. Forse in te c'è ancora una scintilla di ciò che amavo. I tuoi occhi continuano a irradiare parte di quel calore. Io però sono cambiato. Ho una strada da seguire. Guardo la tua foto, illudendomi con l'idea che possiamo tornare al passato. Ma forse siamo solo compagni di viaggio, linee parallele che occasionalmente si sovrappongono. segmenti di tempo condivisi come cibo caldo in una stanza senza luce. Perhaps in you there's still a spark of what I used to love. Your eyes keep radiating part of that warmth. Yet I've changed. I have a way to go. I watch your picture, deluding myself with the idea we can go back to the past. But maybe we are just travel companions, parallel lines occasionally overlapping, segments of time shared, like a warm meal in a room with no light. Il suono del mio alito, quando espiro l'aria nell'asciugamano, dopo essermi lavato, mi confonde. Mi fa pensare a un colpo di vento, ma fuori l'aria è immobile. Il mondo è immerso nel silenzio. Guardo l'interno della casa e capisco che non ci sei più. La tua assenza è rappresa nella nuvola appena emessa dal mio naso e assorbita da questo pezzo di stoffa spugnosa. My breath's noise when I exhale the air into my towel after washing up baffles me. It makes me think of a blast of wind, but outside the air is still. The whole world is plunged in silence. I look at the inside of my house and realize you are no longer here. Your absence is condensed in the cloud just emitted by my nose and absorbed by this piece of spongy cloth. Un treno fantasma attraversa il finestrino. Forse è una proiezione di momenti passati. A volte si riaffacciano, come la foto di un'amante lontana nascosta in un cassetto. Si avvicinano, sfiorandomi con l'ultima scossa di una carica elettrica, morta. E il viso di lei diventa quello della viaggiatrice che ho accanto, sola, sicura di sé, triste. Un pallido riflesso su un vetro sporco. Buio riverbero di occasioni non colte. A ghost train passes by across the window. Maybe it's a projection of past moments. Sometimes they reappear, like the picture of a faraway lover hidden in a drawer. They approach me, grazing me with the last shock of a dead electric charge. And her faces becomes that of the traveler beside me, alone, self-confident, sad, a pale reflection on a dirty window, dark reverberation of chances never caught. This is the last one. Chiazza di mondo, raggrumata in una spora dalla superficie corrugata, bianca e nera, simile alla buccia di un'arancia, ma con sfumature brune, sotto la luce di lampioni che vegliano la solitudine di un'auto ben parcheggiata. Sottile profumo di libertà passate, embrione di rinato entusiasmo, lontani uggiolii di cani lasciati soli. Un gallo chiama, a un passo dall'alba. Spot of world clotted in a spore by the corrugated black and white surface, similar to the peel of an orange, but with brownish hues, under the light of street lamps watching over the solitude of a properly parked car. Subtle smell of past freedoms, embryo of a newborn enthusiasm, remote whines of dogs left alone, a rooster calling, one step away from dawn. Thank you so much. Thank you. I hope you like them. And yes, that was just a little sample. I tried to put together the poems that and the passages that I felt more, meaningful in terms of atmosphere. There are some others that are very short, like what we call poesia hermetica, but they make more sense maybe in Italian than in English. And there are other ones that are more or less in tune with the rest. So I selected these ones for this reason. So I want to thank you all by heart, really, for inviting me, and I hope we will be in touch. You can also find me on Facebook if you use Facebook. If you don't use Facebook, you can write me, Giovanni Agnoloni at gmail.com. It's easy to remember, name, surname, gmail.com. Not in Italian, but in English you can write me, or in Polish you can write me. But so thank you, and let's have a coffee. Okay. Now let's save this because I don't want to lose it.